Welcome to Switzerland, everyone. I'm Michael. We're here in Vevey on Lake Geneva, and we're going to talk today about a place that is not Dubai. So it is a place that kind of a lot of people overlook as a place to form companies. And so let's backtrack a little bit and talk about why it is that you should possibly consider this place that most people do not consider. I don't hear anyone talking about it online, and yet it has a lot of benefits that might be worth looking at. So let's dive in and discuss it. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for your support. Welcome. I am Michael. We are here at Offshore Citizen, some of the foremost international relocation and tax experts in the world. And we help people to kind of figure out how to navigate their global circumstance. Don't care about which country. We've dealt with people from 150 jurisdictions. We form companies and set up structures all over the world, so no bias there. So although I live a lot of the time in UAE, I'm going to talk to you about an alternative today to UAE for certain people. And so this comes down a little bit to the subject of whether a typical person, pick random XYZ person, should form a company in UAE. And I have a lot of people who reach out to me. I'll do a series of videos on this subject in general because I see people, talking all sorts of crap, anti-UAE, and I talk to pro-UAE, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that the argument should always be, what is the expression they say when it comes to medicine, right? They'll say, treatment without diagnosis is malpractice. And I think the same is true here. You need to understand your situation. So I'll have people who will contact me and they're like, hey, I'm living in UK and I'm going to stay living in UK and I'm thinking to start a company in UAE. And I'm like, that's probably a terrible idea. Why? Well, UAE company might make a lot of sense if you're going to move to UAE. But if you're not going to go to UAE, UAE companies tend to be a fairly expensive option and not an option that is particularly optimal for many people. It's pretty rare that if you're not going to get residency in UAE, like you actually aren't going to spend a bunch of the year there, depart from another country, that I would say UAE is a top choice for you. And the reason for that is a few things. First of all, well, now they have this 9% corporate tax, which you're probably going to get hit by. Not always, but in most businesses you will. Number two, you're going to be in a situation where the cost of setting up and maintaining that company is fairly high. Again, now with the taxes, you have accounting and reporting and things like this, that drives up the cost. And number three, you have to typically get a residence permit, which means you're going to have to visit there every 6 months or so. And that's going to add to your costs. You're going to have to, it's just, you're putting a lot of money into something that, frankly, it's questionable how much value there is. If you sort of reverse it, you say, well, I could get a lot of the similar stuff or something pretty close in some place like Bulgaria or Hungary. You're talking about 10% flat tax in Bulgaria, 5% dividend tax, okay, 14.5% effective tax versus 9% in UAE, but I don't have necessarily all this hassle. Hungary, we have 9% corporate tax, depending on how it's structured. And by the way, similar thing with someplace like Bulgaria, you're going to get potentially no withholding tax. And so, you can kind of just look at that and say, like, well, what am I doing going to UAE? Now, I do think UAE has been incredibly smart about choosing 9% because surrounding countries typically are 10 or 15, things like this. Like, you can kind of ask, well, where are the places that have lower corporate tax than 9%? And the answer is there's not many of them, and most of them you don't want to use, right? So I've seen some people online will send me different content, et cetera, and they're like, oh, go here, do BVI. BVI is a terrible place for most people to set up a company. Someplace like Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, yes, you can do this, but now you need corporate fiduciaries. Now there's a bunch of nonsense there. Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Bahamas, you just start running down the list. A lot of these places, it's not to say that they don't have a place, right? For the right person, the right situation, they do have a place. They do make sense. But they're not really a viable alternative for most people's businesses to someplace like UAE because you're typically going to have bad banking. Somebody will be like, oh, well, you can bank in Switzerland. Your BVI company banking in Switzerland, typically you're not going to have great options there. Payment processing, you're going to have typically problems with a BVI company for payment processing. You kind of run down the list. There are places like Hong Kong, there's places like Singapore, there are a handful of places that you could consider Mauritius, but not a ton of them, okay? So a lot of these kind of get excluded, and so you can kind of see how they were super smart. They're like, well, we're lower than a lot of these other guys, and that gives us an advantage. But that brings us to today's topic, right? Who is today's topic? Today's topic is Qatar, and I don't hear people talk about Qatar, like really ever. Bahrain is a similar one, and I'll do a video in the future about Bahrain. But in the case of Qatar, so Qatar is a 10% corporate tax place, which again, like we said, strategically, Dubai or UAE, very smart, slide in 1% lower, 1%, right? Hard to make the case to do otherwise. So then you might say, well, Michael, what are you saying? Then why are we talking about Qatar? Well, Qatar has two interesting things about it. So the first is they actually have free zone companies. Now, the free zone does not apply to all types of companies. Okay, so again, treatment without diagnosis is malpractice. You should absolutely not be like, oh, hey, this is like the be all and end all for everybody. This is not the be all and end all. There is no be all and end all. Everybody has to have a case by case analysis, which is why we spend a whole bunch of time looking at people and asking them questions. And maybe that sounds frustrating or something, but the truth is, you have to kind of know what you're getting into, and the effort that you go through to plan it properly is far less than the pain in the ass that you'll have on the other side if you do it badly. Okay, so that is the thing that we need to consider here. Okay, so what is the deal? Well, if you're doing certain business activities, and there's a pretty broad range, you can potentially have a free zone company in Qatar. And that free zone company in Qatar is zero tax. Now, somebody might ask, you might say, well, hang on a minute, there used to be that in UAE, Michael. Isn't it true that they could change in Qatar? Yes, of course. They could change anywhere, right? Like all of these countries can change their rules. Now, what they will say is they'll say, oh yeah, but it's like guaranteed for 20 years or something like this. Look, they had kind of a similar thing in a bunch of these places. The truth is, if the government decides they want to change it, they can change it. Okay, it's not like you're really guaranteed. So in that regard, yes, it's possible that they change. On the other hand, let's just look globally. Qatar is not under a lot of international pressure to change. Why? Partially because they're not popular. There's go and tell me all the flood of people who are telling you like Qatar is the place to go. Let's go set up a company in Qatar. You will not find it. And because of that, that means that there's less likely to be pressure that is going to cause you issues. So this is a very good thing. Next is Qatar has a reasonable network of tax treaties. And again, this sometimes matters, sometimes it doesn't. I've done some videos in the past on where tax treaties matter, where they don't matter, why people, I think, are kind of off base in that regard. But there are certain cases where it definitely does matter. And so if you can take advantage of a Qatar tax treaty, well, that's wonderful for you. Now, it's not always the case. And so, again, treatment without diagnosis is malpractice. You need to focus on diagnosis first. Diagnosis first, figure out what is optimal for you. But there's that. Next, you can get banking options there. Like, a lot of these places, like I said, if you're in the Caribbean, most good banking options are just not available to you, period. And so that's a problem. Well, Qatar, there's actually reasonable banking options. Now, if it turns out you actually want to, and you can get residence permits to live in Qatar, the cost of living and what you get for the money in terms of, say, go and take a look at what you will get for an apartment for an equivalent amount of money in Doha versus Dubai, you will find it is better in Doha than it is in Dubai. And so that's kind of cool. That gives you an advantage. Now, I'm saying that, hey, listen, this is, Qatar is better than UAE. No, absolutely not. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that for the right person in the right circumstance, this is definitely an option you should consider that nobody is really talking about, right? I would say that, to me, I prefer the quality of life and the array of amenities and things like this, and the network effects and the networking and all the sort of stuff that you get from Dubai over someplace like Doha. However, I'm not everybody, right? Some people have different preferences. And so you kind of need to consider what works. But I think that if you're thinking, you're going to set up an operating company, and you're like, I want to try and have tax optimization. I want something where I can have good banking. Here's the tax treaties that are important to me. Maybe in most cases, maybe they aren't important to you. It's something that should definitely be on your radar as a reasonable possibility. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments below. It is like a little bit of a process to set up a company there, but definitely an option. You can reach out to us if you have questions about it. Send us an email, like I said, at info@offshorecitizen.net, or you can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.